or somewhere in that general vicinity. We began last Sunday a series on faith for living and at the end we suggested that the human spirit is desperately concerned about finding an ultimate basis for self-respect, something that will give to the individual a warmth and an assurance that will break his sense of isolation as he is surrounded either by the vastness and the impersonal operations of the world of nature on the one hand, or as he is surrounded by the vastness and impersonal operations of the social order on the other hand. For despite the fact that we are all expressions of life on the planet, and despite the fact that we are all intimately, in one way or another, associated with other expressions of life, both human and expressions that we do not choose to call human, there is a sense in which every human spirit battles with his aloneness. Not his loneliness, but with his aloneness. And in his aloneness, he is apt to feel himself the subject of all sorts of unrealities. And as he tries to relate himself to people and to things that are external to himself, it is his way of defining the meaning of his little life. So that always we're trying to find some other than self-reference, something that is outside of me, but not altogether outside of me. Something that is related to me, but not altogether related to me. Something that against which I can throw myself and bounce back so I know I've hit something. It's that feeling that we want, and that's the only way that we can break our isolation. And I'm suggesting this morning that from within the context of religious experience, God is the great other than self-reference, without which life has no meaning, and without which there can be no creative and dynamic faith. Now, I will not undertake to make a case for the existence of God, because I can't make such a case that you can't easily disprove if you try. And I don't want to tempt you in that way this morning. But I'd like to talk with you about it a little. Why I feel that it is so necessary in our time, this loss of nerve, to borrow a phrase that was used in connection with the Roman Empire many years ago, this loss of nerve that has given all of us a kind of paralysis and a great depression. It's interesting to, and please do not get self-conscious now when I say this, but it is interesting, as I have to do a lot of talking in various parts of the place. It's interesting to watch to look at the faces of the people. Everybody seems so tired and so weary, not sleepy, just tired, not tired from labor, but there's something dynamic about healthy fatigue, but a great weariness. I noticed it even 4 or 5 years ago when I was working for a half year at the University of Iowa, and I had 375 freshmen in a core course in religion. They were just 15, 16, 17-year-old exuberances. But they had this weariness, this weariness. Now, of course, you may sit there and say it is just a reflection of my own weariness, but that's all right. It merely relates me very definitely to all the rest of us. Now, I think that the experience of God is one of the answers, the answer in my book for a working and dynamic faith. It is interesting to me that the awareness of God seems always to be the creation of some kind of present passion. I'd like to linger with that. That the awareness of God seems to me always to be in its initial moment, the awareness of some kind of acuteness, some kind of present ferment. One of the very important contributions that a certain philosopher has made to the whole process of thinking on the part of man suggests that there can be no thought, no reflective process of mind, unless there be a problem. So this man, who's no longer living, says that all thinking arises initially out of a problem. If there be no problem, there can be no reflective thinking. And he goes on to sketch the process by which the thinking is oriented. He says that a man is aware first of a problem, something that interrupts the flow, the normal process of his movement and thinking and living. Now, once this is interrupted, then the individual begins to become aware, not merely of the interruption, but aware of the process. And the first thing that he wants to do is to try to define it, locate this interruption, locate and define it. What is it? And when he locates and defines his difficulty, whatever it may be, then he begins to try to get out from under the difficulty, to try to resolve the difficulty. And as soon as he begins resolving his difficulty, or trying to resolve it, he suddenly discovers that he draws on all of the resources of his life up to that point. And quickly, he runs through the possibilities of this suggestion, that suggestion, the other suggestion, and he says, oh, no, that won't work. That isn't the answer. And then he tries this, and oh, that isn't the answer, and this. And then finally, something suggests itself to him, if he be resourceful sufficiently, that says, well, now I like that. I think that's the key. I think that will answer the problem. I think that will solve the problem. And then he develops very carefully now the bearings of this suggestion. And if, as he thinks about it, the suggestion seems to be fruitful and creative in terms of his problem, then he says, yes, that's it. And he tests it, he validates it, he corroborates it by solving the problem. Now, it is in some situation of present passion, present concern, present anxiety, that the awareness of God first emerges. But the interesting thing is that when even though it emerges in a concrete particular with reference to some immediacy, maybe some dire need, it never rests there. For as soon as I begin to raise any questions about the meaning of my own life, as soon as I begin to raise any questions that cause me to reach out for answers to my particular problem, at once I become involved in meanings that go beyond me. Why should my little life have meaning if all of life has no meaning? And soon I begin to move out and out and out. Now, I require then, and this is the first suggestion that I want to make, that the human spirit requires of God two things. The first is that it requires, and it's rather embarrassing to say the human spirit requires of God. That's not good, but I can't say it in any other way. That it requires of God that He be, perhaps let me say it this way, it requires of life that there be a creator. That's much better. It requires of life that there be a creator. That quite rationally, as I look at the world, I can't be a sane human being and decide that the world just came along from nowhere, just got here. That here it is, and that's all. That there must be something that of which this whole world is the for instance. Now I can accept that, you see, without being religious. You see, I don't have to be religious. All I need to do is be rational. That the world is a created fact. Now, as my mind begins to work on that, it may decide, you see, that that the world was created in whatever way, I do not know, but the world was created and set going. And in this the creation of the world, my little existence was provided for. And I must take the world or leave it. I must take it as it is, because I can't change anything. Now, if, as I live along, I run into things that, by my standards, cannot possibly be construed as good things, as decent things, as clean things, as right things, then I am driven, you see, quite rationally. It has nothing to do with religion at the moment. I'm driven quite rationally to decide that whatever created the world is much worse than I am, because it also created all these things that are giving me all the trouble now, you see. And I know that I would have done better than that. Much better. Now, if I decide that it is worse than I am in terms of character and so forth because of these things, then I know that I have still another problem because I'm not altogether bad. There are great good impulses in me, good things that I do, good things that I feel, and always I see more good than I'm ever able to achieve. So that was created also. And my mind keeps on working at it, and I decide that perhaps then whatever created the world may be having as hard a time as I'm having. But if that which created the world is having as hard a time as I'm having, then there must be some other force in the universe with which that force must reckon. And I'm driven then into the arms of two forces, at least, struggling for supremacy, but cannot ever find supremacy, one or the other, because they are of equal strength and equal relevance. So I say, well, maybe I can do something about it. I have a vote. One little vote, not a great big one. One vote. And that vote I'll cast on the side for which I'm rooting. On which side are you rooting? I'll cast my vote on that side. But I know that all it means is my vote and the extent of my little influence. Now, in religious thought, provisions has always been made for these two possibilities. So we have ideas of a devil who's in control of the evil part of life, and God who is in control of the good part of life. And we feel that ultimately, sometimes, that ultimately, you might land with one or the other. And every time, I don't understand this, but every time a society begins to lose its nerve, one of the first manifestations of it is a loss of confidence in the idea of ultimate destiny. It's very interesting. And as soon as men begin to relax their insistence that at long last the human spirit lands somewhere, then little by little, all the meaning of experience at this level and that level disintegrates. So, the first thing that happens in a period of moral confusion is that the religious spirit rises up with an insistence that calls attention not to the meaning of this detail or that detail or the other detail, but calls attention to the meaning of the ultimate destiny of man. So, Jesus illustrates it in a very fascinating way. He takes, doubtless is reminded of those two verses in Ecclesiasticus about the man who ate and waxed fat and then decided he'd make room for all of his new possessions. And then he woke up one morning dead. I mean, he didn't wake up one morning. and now Jesus takes those two little verses in Ecclesiasticus, and what does he do with it? Here's a man, rich barns, rich harvest. And he says, I will tear down my barns and build bigger barns so that I may store up all this harvest that has come. And I will say to myself, be comfortable, eat and enjoy. All of this is yours. And when he does that, Jesus says, somebody knocks at the door. This night, you must face the ultimate meaning of your life. And for that you are not prepared because you have been dealing in corn and wheat, harvesting, building barns, tearing down barns. Did you not know that however you decide the meaning of your life at the point that your life has meaning, you are making an ultimate decision. You are unlocking the door to the secret of secrets, to the Holy of Holies. Now, the second demand that brings me to it is that God be therefore intimate and in some way personal. Now, I know the difficulties there, but let's look at them for a moment. And this is a unique claim of religion. Any philosophy, in a metaphysical interpretation of life, can structure a creation and can account for an impersonal involvement. But it is a unique contribution of religion that God be intimate and in some sense private and therefore personal. For as the Grand Inquisitor says in the Brothers Karamazov, everybody needs three things. He needs something to worship that is his own. I cannot rest until at last I find an altar before which I bring the precious intimacies of my living. However hard-boiled and impersonal and difficult my life may be, I must have some place with which I can share the deepest and most meaningful and most precious things of my life. Something that, some place I must find. So I must worship. And I hate myself if I find that I am offering the precious things of my life to that which I recognize as being unworthy of them. And that's why men finally can't worship money. That's why men finally cannot worship possessions. That's why men cannot finally worship other human beings. Because in the moment that I lay on my altar the ultimate treasure of my being, when I look up into the face of the object before which I make my confession or my offering, I must not be ashamed or depraved by, or disgraced by, or humiliated by that which I see. That's why no positivistic theory, even of the social order, has been able to stand up under the withering pressure of the intimate demands of the human spirit. So, whatever it is, then you see that is the altar. It becomes more and more the resting place for all my precious treasures of meaning. It is more than a symbol. In the Old Testament, when one of the heroes goes to sleep at night and has a vision of God, and he wakes up in the morning and he places a pillar there, a stone, because here he met and wrestled with God, and all the travelers who came that way, through all the generations, as long as it lasted, when they saw the stones, they picked up a stone and put it there because they said, this is a holy place. It is a place where a man met the most precious, the most completely meaningful moments of his life. Now, I must also, that becomes the basis for my values. I just thought about it. It becomes the basis for my right and wrong. And it's very interesting. I may quite ethically and quite morally have, as all men, I think, have a certain sense of right and wrong. Sometimes a gross sense of right and wrong. Sometimes a refined sense of right and wrong. But it may not be infused and inspired by and with religious, spiritual values that are rooted in the centrality of the worship of God. I may be moral and ethical, good. I may even be whole and clean, and not religious. But the moment I present myself before the altar, and by altar I don't mean a thing or place. When I present myself before the altar, bringing all of my preciousness, whole now seems full of holes. What I thought was clean now seems unclean, or vice versa. And little by little then, I'm able to give to this altar and its object the final word about what my values are. And that is why when men believe in God in this sense, they do not ever lose their hope about the meaning of the world and its destiny. Now there's one other thing that I'd like to say, and I'm through. And that is that this does not answer the most persistent question that I must have answered. And that is, what can I do then with the tragic sense of life? Is there any way by which I can keep the tragedies of life from overcoming all of the positive and creative things that I may think privately. And it's easy for me to say to you, while you're wrestling with your tragedy, now I think that if you just think this way and this way and this way, it'll be very simple. As the Zulu proverb puts it, the full-bellied child says to empty-bellied child, be of good cheer. It's very simple. And it's simple until I'm called upon to deal with my tragedy. My tragedy. Now, is faith in God, which is fact, not theory, is faith in God any answer to human tragedy? Now, I know all of the generalizations that I could give, which are part of my heritage and a part of my training. But I ask you, in what sense, for each of you, in what sense is your relation to your altar the answer to the tragedies of your life? Make contact in the tragedies of your own living and experience with something, someone who sustains you. Honestly now, do you? Or is it true that deep within your own heart, you are not convinced that there is any way by which you can lay hold on anything that is capable of providing a current that can float the cargoes of your life? Now, what I have found seems very crude and perhaps meaningless. But I will say it, and I'm through. I have found that the love of God what I call the love of God gives to me a sense of tranquility and assurance that often makes no sense to my mind. Again and again, I have found that it seems that I must turn my back on the logic of the event and the incident in order that my spirit may be given the wings that I need to enable me to stand whatever life can do. And sometimes it comes, the tranquility comes in prayer. Sometimes it comes in the midst of my anguish. Sometimes it comes at the end of a great exhaustion. Sometimes it just comes without announcement. And it is then that I understand the meaning of the psalmist. Thou hast beset me behind and before, and laid thy hand upon me. Such knowledge is too wonderful for me. It is high. I cannot attain unto it. Nothing else matters then. Let the winds blow to their awakened death. Let the laboring bark climb hills of sea Olympus high, and dart again as low as hell's from heaven. Even if it were now to die, 'twere now to be most happy.